The Alpha King thought she was just a political bride, until the Omega left and never came back. How could someone walk away from a crown and never return? And what makes a departure so final that it changes everything left behind? If stories of fate, heartbreak, and second chances keep you watching until the very end, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, if you were trapped in a political marriage, would you stay or leave without looking back? Now, let the silence before the first chapter speak for itself as this unforgettable story begins. A marriage built on duty can survive many winters, but a heart left unseen always finds its own way home. The bells of Blackwood Citadel echoed across the valley long before sunrise, their solemn chimes rolling through forests wrapped in silver mist and over rooftops where every window glowed with expectation. Hundreds had gathered beneath banners stitched with the crest of the Northern Crown, believing they were about to witness the beginning of a love story worthy of legends. They smiled as white petals drifted through the cool autumn air. They applauded when the royal carriage appeared beyond the towering iron gates. They whispered about destiny, about fate, about the future Luna, who would stand beside the most powerful Alpha King in generations. But inside that elegant carriage, Claire Bennet stared quietly through the glass, watching the celebration as though it belonged to someone else's life. Her ivory gown shimmered with delicate embroidery that had taken dozens of royal seamstresses weeks to complete, yet she barely noticed its beauty. Every jewel resting against her pale skin felt heavier than the last, each one another reminder that nothing she wore today truly belonged to her. She had not been chosen because of love. She had not been sought because someone knew her heart. She was simply the daughter of an influential Southern family whose alliance could preserve peace between rival packs. A signature on parchment. A promise between powerful names. A political bride. Across the castle courtyard, Ethan Blackwood stood beneath towering stone columns, as if he had been carved from the same gray granite surrounding him. At 32, the Alpha King carried himself with effortless authority that silenced every conversation whenever he entered a room. His dark-tailored ceremonial coat fit perfectly across broad shoulders, while the silver wolf emblem over his heart reflected the pale, morning light. Advisors surrounded him with quiet urgency, discussing borders, treaties, trade routes, and security, but Ethan listened with calm precision. Marriage, to him, belonged in the same category as every other responsibility resting upon his crown. Necessary, practical, predictable. His closest advisor stepped beside him with a respectful nod. "Everything is ready, Your Majesty." Ethan glanced toward the approaching carriage without excitement.
Good.
Once the ceremony is complete, the council meeting begins in 1 hour. The advisor hesitated for only a heartbeat before asking carefully, "Would you like a few private moments with Lady Claire before the vows?" Ethan adjusted the cuff of one black glove and answered without looking away from the gathering crowd. "There will be time for introductions after the ceremony. Today is about stability, not sentiment." Those words disappeared into the crisp autumn breeze before anyone else could hear them, but somehow they carried the weight of an invisible promise. Not a promise to Claire. A promise to himself. Keep emotions separate. Keep duty first. Keep the kingdom safe. As attendants opened the carriage door, Claire accepted the offered hand with quiet grace and stepped onto polished stone beneath hundreds of watchful eyes. Cheers rose instantly from the crowd. Children waved tiny royal flags. Elderly couples smiled with hopeful tears glistening in their eyes. To everyone watching, the young Omega appeared every bit the future queen they had imagined. Gentle, elegant,
Calm.
No one noticed the almost invisible breath she released as she lifted her gaze toward the man waiting at the altar. Ethan looked at her with courtesy, not cruelty. Respect, not affection. She recognized the difference immediately. And in that single silent moment, before either of them spoke a word, Claire made a promise no one else could hear. She would fulfill every vow expected of her, but she would never beg to be loved by a man who believed duty alone could build a marriage. The royal wedding became the kingdom's favorite story long before anyone knew the truth hidden behind its polished smiles. Every morning, Claire Bennet crossed the marble halls of Blackwood Citadel with quiet grace, greeting every servant by name, remembering which gardener worried about his aging father and which kitchen apprentice dreamed of opening a bakery in a small lakeside town one day. She listened more than she spoke, and somehow people always walked away feeling lighter after a conversation with her. It was not because she possessed extraordinary power. It was because she noticed the things everyone else hurried past. She remembered birthdays, comforted frightened children during winter storms, thanked guards who stood through freezing nights, and personally visited elderly pack members who could no longer travel to the castle for seasonal celebrations. Within only a few months, the palace no longer felt like a fortress built of cold stone. Flowers appeared in forgotten courtyards. Music drifted through servant corridors during dinner. The royal library stayed open later because Claire believed every child deserved a place to dream. Even the oldest members of the household quietly admitted that laughter had become more common since the new Luna arrived. Ethan noticed these changes, but only as improvements listed inside reports prepared by his advisors. The palace atmosphere has improved. Public approval continues to rise. Merchant satisfaction is increasing. Visitor feedback is overwhelmingly positive. Every accomplishment became another line on another document placed neatly upon his polished oak desk. He signed each report with calm efficiency before moving to discussions about border security, harvest forecasts, and diplomatic negotiations. Whenever Claire entered his office carrying tea prepared exactly the way he preferred, he always thanked her politely before returning to the endless stack of royal responsibilities waiting for his attention. There was never cruelty in his voice, never impatience, never anger. Yet there was something else that quietly settled between them every single day. Distance. At dinner, they discussed council schedules instead of hopes. During public appearances, they smiled for the kingdom with perfect composure before returning to separate responsibilities once the applause faded. At night, the enormous castle felt even larger, its endless corridors stretching between two people who lived beneath the same roof, but rarely shared the same moment. Claire often stood beside the tall windows overlooking the moonlit gardens, watching lanterns sway gently in the evening breeze while wondering if anyone could truly belong somewhere they were only needed, never chosen. She never complained. She never demanded affection. She never asked Ethan to become someone he was not. Instead, she poured every ounce of kindness into everyone around her because giving warmth was the only way she knew to keep loneliness from freezing her own heart. One rainy afternoon, a young maid accidentally dropped an expensive porcelain vase outside the grand ballroom. The frightened girl immediately burst into tears, convinced she would lose her position. Before anyone else arrived, Claire knelt beside her, helping gather the broken pieces with careful hands despite wearing an elegant cream-colored gown. She smiled gently and whispered, "People matter more than porcelain." Hidden behind the nearby gallery entrance, Ethan paused for only a second after witnessing the scene. A faint expression crossed his face, almost curiosity, before another advisor approached with urgent matters involving neighboring territories. Without another glance, he continued walking toward duty while Claire remained behind, comforting someone whose name would never appear inside a royal report. Neither of them realized that the smallest moments often become the ones remembered forever, especially when they are overlooked by the person who needed to see them the most. Autumn surrendered quietly to the first breath of winter, and with every passing week the castle became even more beautiful under Claire's gentle care. Lantern festivals filled the courtyards. With warm golden light, children from nearby villages were invited inside the palace walls for storytelling evenings. Elderly widows who had once spent holidays alone now received handwritten invitations to royal dinners. People throughout the northern territories began calling Blackwood Citadel the kingdom with the kindest Luna anyone could remember. Ethan heard those words often. Merchants praised her generosity during trade meetings. Visiting alphas admired the remarkable loyalty of the castle staff. Even foreign ambassadors commented on the peaceful atmosphere surrounding the royal household. He accepted every compliment with a polite nod, believing they reflected a successful administration rather than the quiet devotion of one extraordinary woman. Claire never corrected anyone. She simply continued doing what she believed was right. One chilly afternoon, she organized warm blankets and fresh meals for families living in the mountain villages after an early snowfall surprised the region. She personally rode through winding forest roads with volunteers despite the freezing wind that painted her cheeks pink. When she returned after sunset, exhausted but smiling, Ethan was still inside the council chamber discussing tax policies that had stretched several hours longer than expected. He noticed the snowflakes melting in her hair as she quietly crossed the hallway outside the chamber doors. "The trip was successful?" he asked without lifting his eyes completely from the documents in his hands. Claire smiled gently. "Everyone is safe. That is what matters." Ethan gave a small nod. "Good work." Then another advisor approached him with fresh reports, and the conversation ended almost before it had begun. Claire stood there for a heartbeat longer. Not because she expected praise, but because somewhere deep inside, she had hoped he might ask one simple question. "Are you tired? Did you eat? Was the journey difficult?" Instead, she watched him disappear once again into another room where the kingdom always seemed to need him more than she did. As winter deepened, whispers also found their way into the palace. Noble women exchanged quiet comments behind embroidered fans. During formal gatherings, "She is pleasant enough," one remarked softly, "but everyone knows this marriage was arranged for politics." Another smiled politely while sipping tea. "His Majesty respects her. That should be enough." Claire heard more than people realized. She had learned long ago that silence often allowed truth to reveal itself. The words did not anger her. They simply settled inside her heart like tiny snowflakes, each one too light to matter alone, yet impossible to ignore once enough had gathered. During the annual winter solstice banquet, the grand ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers while musicians filled the air with elegant melodies. Nobles from every allied pack arrived dressed in velvet and silver, eager to celebrate another year of peace. Claire greeted every guest with genuine warmth, remembering names, families, and stories with effortless grace. Many admired her kindness. Some admired her beauty. A few admired only the influence her marriage represented. Late in the evening, an elderly duchess smiled politely before asking in a voice sweet enough for nearby guests to hear, "Your Majesty, does the Alpha King ever find time to dance with his beautiful bride, or is the kingdom still his only true companion?" Soft laughter floated across the polished floor. Claire answered with remarkable composure. "His people will always deserve his greatest attention." The Duchess nodded with theatrical sympathy. How fortunate for the people. Ethan stood only a few yards away speaking with military commanders. He heard the exchange. For the briefest moment, his eyes met Claire's across the ballroom. Something unreadable passed between them before another commander requested his opinion on border patrols. Ethan turned back to the discussion without another word. Claire lowered her eyes with the same graceful smile she had worn since her wedding day. Yet somewhere beyond that quiet expression, another small piece of hope slipped away without making a sound. When spring finally arrived, the snow disappeared from the castle gardens, but the quiet distance between Ethan and Claire remained untouched. The roses she had planted beside the eastern walkway began to bloom, their soft fragrance drifting through open palace windows each morning. Servants smiled more often. Children laughed louder. Travelers spoke of Blackwood Citadel as a place where kindness lived alongside power. Yet inside the royal residence, Claire slowly stopped waiting for footsteps that never came. She no longer lingered outside Ethan's study after bringing him tea. She no longer looked toward the council chamber whenever she heard familiar voices in the hallway. She continued every responsibility with the same grace, but somewhere inside, hope had grown tired of standing alone. One afternoon, the royal council announced a grand diplomatic banquet to celebrate a new alliance with neighboring territories. Nobles, ambassadors, military leaders, and influential families filled the magnificent ballroom, where crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny lights across polished marble floors. Music floated gently through the room while servers carried silver trays filled with elegant meals prepared for guests who expected perfection from the Northern Crown. Claire welcomed every visitor with the same warm smile that had earned the love of the kingdom. She remembered family names, asked about recovering relatives, and congratulated young couples on recent engagements. Even foreign delegates quietly admired her remarkable ability to make every conversation feel personal. Ethan watched much of it from across the room while discussing future trade routes with allied alpha leaders. He noticed how effortlessly Claire represented the crown. He appreciated her professionalism, yet appreciation and understanding were not the same thing. As the evening continued, Lord Victor Ashcroft, an influential noble known for speaking more boldly than wisdom advised, lifted his crystal glass during a pause in the music. Wearing an easy smile that disguised sharp intentions, he addressed the gathering loudly enough for nearby conversations to fall silent. We should all recognize Her Majesty for fulfilling her role so flawlessly. Political marriages are rarely this pleasant. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor continued with a small laugh. His Majesty certainly made an excellent diplomatic decision. It appears peace can indeed wear a beautiful smile. A few nervous chuckles echoed through the ballroom. Others lowered their eyes. Claire remained perfectly composed, though her fingers tightened almost invisibly around the stem of her glass. Every word carried the same quiet message. She was not a beloved wife. She was a successful agreement between powerful families. Nothing more. For one brief moment, the room became completely still. Ethan heard every sentence. He saw the subtle sadness hidden behind Claire's calm expression. He understood that one sentence from him could change the entire atmosphere. He could have simply said, "She is far more than politics." He could have taken one step toward her. He could have reminded everyone that respect begins with the king himself. Instead, years of discipline whispered that creating a public disagreement during an international celebration would embarrass important allies and distract from the alliance they had worked so hard to secure. Ethan calmly set his glass onto the table and answered in the same measured voice he used during every council meeting. "Tonight we celebrate unity among the Pax. Let us keep our attention on the future we are building together." The conversation immediately shifted as musicians resumed playing. Diplomats returned to discussing treaties. Smiles slowly reappeared across the ballroom. To everyone else, the awkward moment had ended. But for Claire, something far more important had quietly come to an end. She looked at Ethan from across the crowded hall, not with anger, not with tears, but with an unexpected peace that even surprised her. At last she understood what she had refused to admit for so long. The silence she had accepted again and again was not temporary. It had become the language of their marriage. And that night, without speaking a single word about it, Claire stopped waiting for the man she had promised her heart to finally see it. The palace clock struck 5 just as the first pale light crept over the eastern mountains, but Claire Bennett had already been awake for hours. Her room was unusually quiet, untouched by the cheerful routine that had once filled each morning with plans for gardens, village visits, and children's lessons. Instead, she stood before the tall window, watching the sun slowly color the horizon in shades of gold and soft blue. The view was as beautiful as it had always been, yet for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Citadel, she felt like she was looking at it with completely open eyes. She crossed the room without hesitation and opened the carved oak wardrobe. The elegant gowns commissioned by the royal court remained neatly arranged inside, each one representing another public appearance, another celebration, another carefully practiced smile. Claire ran her fingertips lightly across the rich fabrics before closing the doors again. None of them belonged to the woman she wanted to become. She packed only a simple traveling dress, a warm cloak, sturdy boots, a small leather journal, and the worn silver pendant her late mother had given her years before. Everything she truly treasured fit inside one modest travel bag. The royal crown rested upon a velvet cushion beside the mirror, catching the growing morning light. Claire looked at it for a long moment before gently lifting it into both hands. It had never felt like a prize. It had always felt like a promise she had tried with all her heart to honor. Carefully, she carried it to Ethan's private study, where the room still smelled faintly of old books, polished wood, and the cedar fire that burned late into nearly every night. His desk remained perfectly organized, covered with maps, official correspondence, and unfinished council reports. Claire placed the crown at the center of the desk. Beside it, she laid her wedding ring. Then she folded a single handwritten letter and rested it beneath the silver band so it would not drift away if the windows were opened. The letter contained no blame.
No accusations. No bitterness.
Only quiet honesty. Thank you for treating me with respect when the world expected less. I hope one day you discover that kindness deserves to be seen, not simply appreciated. I cannot continue waiting to be chosen by someone who only needed me. I sincerely hope you find the future you have always worked so hard to protect. As for me, it is finally time to find the life I have never allowed myself to live. Claire Bennett. She looked around the study one final time, remembering every evening she had quietly placed tea beside his reports, every hopeful glance that had gone unnoticed, every conversation interrupted by another duty waiting beyond the door. Strangely, her heart did not feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful. Outside, the palace remained asleep as she crossed the marble corridors she had once filled with laughter and warmth. A sleepy kitchen boy spotted her near the servants' entrance and smiled. "Your Majesty, are you leaving so early for another village visit?" Claire returned the smile with gentle affection. "Something like that." He nodded, never imagining those would be the last words he would ever exchange with his queen. At the main gate, the elderly captain of the royal guard bowed respectfully. "Will you require an escort, Your Majesty?" Claire shook her head softly. "Not today. I would like to walk on my own." The captain hesitated, sensing something different he could not quite explain, but years of serving beside her had taught him to trust her judgment. He stepped aside and opened the gate. Claire took one final look at Blackwood Citadel as the rising sun illuminated its towers. Then she turned toward the winding road stretching beyond the forest and began walking without once looking back, while behind those ancient stone walls, the kingdom prepared to wake to a morning that would quietly change every life within it. Ethan Blackwood rarely allowed routine to surprise him, but that morning something felt strangely unsettled before he even opened the door to his study. The castle awakened as it always had. Servants prepared breakfast in the kitchens. Stable hands cared for the royal horses. Council members gathered with fresh reports tucked beneath their arms. Everything appeared exactly as it had the day before, yet an unfamiliar stillness lingered through the halls. He stepped inside his study expecting another ordinary beginning, only to stop in complete silence. The royal crown rested neatly at the center of his desk. Beside it lay a silver wedding ring catching the pale morning light streaming through the tall windows. Beneath the ring waited a folded letter written in elegant handwriting he recognized instantly. Ethan stared at it for several long seconds before carefully unfolding the page. As his eyes moved across every sentence, the room seemed unusually quiet. There were no accusations.
No desperate pleas. No anger.
The kindness inside every word somehow felt heavier than blame ever could have. He read the letter once, then again. By the third time, he noticed the final signature trembling slightly beneath his fingertips. Claire Bennett. He looked toward the doorway almost instinctively, expecting to hear soft footsteps approaching with morning tea as they had every day since their wedding. Nothing came. A sharp knock interrupted the silence as his chief advisor entered carrying official documents. "Your Majesty, the council meeting begins in 15 minutes. Ethan looked up slowly. "Where is the Queen?" The advisor hesitated. "No one has seen Her Majesty this morning." Ethan stood immediately. "Find her." Within minutes, the quiet rhythm of the palace changed completely. Servants searched gardens, libraries, music rooms, chapels, and every guest wing. The captain of the royal guard questioned everyone stationed at the gates. Kitchen staff confirmed she had not taken breakfast. Stable workers reported that no royal carriage had departed. Finally, the elderly gate captain stepped forward with visible unease. "Your Majesty," she left on foot shortly after sunrise. "Alone." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. "Alone." The captain lowered his eyes. She requested no escort. I believed she intended another village visit. The words settled heavily over everyone standing inside the entrance hall. No one spoke. Ethan walked through the palace without giving another order, his footsteps echoing against marble floors that suddenly felt far larger than he remembered. He passed the eastern garden where roses bloomed beneath carefully trimmed hedges. Claire had planted them herself after telling the gardeners that every kingdom deserved one place, where people could simply stop and breathe. He continued toward the royal library. A group of children sat quietly beside empty reading cushions. One little boy looked up hopefully when Ethan entered. "Is Queen Claire coming today? She promised to finish our story about the brave little wolf." Ethan opened his mouth, but no answer came. The palace chef quietly approached him later that afternoon. "Your Majesty, should I still prepare the extra bread every Wednesday?" Ethan frowned. "Extra bread?" The chef nodded. Her Majesty always sent it to the widows living near Pine Creek. Ethan had never known. As the hours passed, more voices gently revealed pieces of Claire's life that had existed completely beyond his notice. The head gardener explained that she personally watered the youngest saplings every Sunday evening because she believed growing things responded to patience. The castle physician mentioned that she secretly paid for medicine whenever struggling families could not afford treatment. A stable girl smiled through watery eyes while remembering how Claire always brushed the oldest horse before every royal celebration because she did not want him to feel forgotten. By sunset, Ethan stood alone outside the palace overlooking the valley below. For the first time since becoming king, Blackwood Citadel no longer felt like the center of his kingdom. It felt like an enormous house that had quietly lost its heart without anyone realizing how deeply everything inside had depended upon its gentle rhythm. At sunrise the next morning, Ethan mounted his black stallion and rode beyond the gates of Blackwood Citadel with only one destination in mind, though he had no idea where that destination truly was. His advisors urged him to remain in the capital, reminding him that kings did not disappear without notice, but for the first time in years Ethan ignored the carefully planned schedule waiting on his desk. The council could continue without him for a few days. Border reports could wait. Trade agreements could wait. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Claire was walking alone, and that single truth outweighed every royal obligation he had once believed impossible to postpone. His first stop was Pine Creek, the quiet village where widows gathered every Wednesday for fresh bread. As he entered the small square, conversations immediately fell silent before respectful bows followed. An elderly woman recognized him and smiled kindly. "Your Majesty, we did not expect to see you here." Ethan returned the greeting politely before asking the question that had echoed through his thoughts since reading Claire's letter. "Have you seen Queen Claire?" The woman looked surprised. "Not for several days." "Is everything all right?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "I hope so." The elderly woman folded her hands gently. "She always sat with us instead of standing above us. She listened to stories no one else had time to hear. Last winter she repaired my roof after a storm without telling anyone it was her idea. We only discovered the truth because the carpenter thanked her." Ethan frowned slightly. "She arranged that?" The woman nodded with a warm smile. "She arranged many things without asking for recognition." Ethan thanked her quietly before continuing toward the neighboring villages. Everywhere he traveled, the pattern repeated itself. In Willow Ridge, the local schoolteacher proudly showed him shelves filled with books. Her Majesty donated these after discovering our children shared only 12 books between 40 students. In Ash Hollow, a young physician explained that Claire had quietly created a fund allowing struggling families to receive medicine with dignity instead of charity. Near Silver Lake, a farmer laughed softly while remembering the afternoon the Queen had spent helping frightened children rescue newborn lambs trapped during heavy spring rain. None of these stories appeared inside official reports. None had ever reached the council chamber. They existed only inside grateful hearts scattered across the kingdom. By the fourth day of searching, Ethan reached a small mountain village where a little girl ran toward him carrying a basket of wildflowers. She stopped a few feet away and asked with innocent curiosity, "Are you looking for the lady with the silver necklace?" Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. "You have seen her?" The child nodded enthusiastically. She stayed here 2 nights ago. She taught my little brother how to read his first story. Her mother smiled apologetically. She refused payment for helping at our clinic. She only asked us to keep believing that kindness always returns someday. Ethan looked around the peaceful village, noticing repaired fences, freshly planted gardens, and smiling neighbors greeting one another with genuine warmth. It felt strangely familiar. Not because he had visited before, but because every quiet improvement reminded him of the life Claire had created inside Blackwood Citadel. As he prepared to leave, the village minister approached carrying a worn journal. She forgot this on the porch yesterday morning, he said. Ethan accepted the small leather book carefully, recognizing it immediately as the journal she had packed before leaving the palace. For a brief, hopeful moment, he thought he had finally found the answers he had been chasing. But when he opened the cover, the pages were almost completely blank except for a single handwritten sentence resting near the center of the book. Happiness begins the moment you stop asking someone else to notice your worth. Ethan closed the journal slowly, the words lingering in his mind long after the mountain breeze carried away every other sound around him. 3 weeks passed before Ethan found the first place that did not simply remember Claire, but was still living because of her. Hidden beyond a winding mountain pass stood a quiet valley surrounded by towering pine trees and crystal streams that reflected the afternoon sun like scattered glass. It was not marked on any royal map as a place of importance. There were no castles, no military outposts, no wealthy estates. Yet as Ethan rode closer, he noticed children laughing outside a newly painted schoolhouse, elderly neighbors tending shared gardens, and families working side by side to repair small cottages without anyone being asked. The atmosphere felt peaceful in a way he had never experienced, not because life there was easy, but because every person seemed to believe someone would always help if help was needed. A young carpenter welcomed him politely, unaware of his identity beneath a simple traveling cloak. "You are looking for someone?" Ethan nodded. A woman wearing a silver pendant. The carpenter smiled immediately. "Miss Claire. She is at the community hall." Ethan's heart stopped for a moment. He followed the sound of cheerful conversation until he reached a modest stone building with wide open windows. Inside, dozens of villagers sat together around long wooden tables while children practiced reading aloud beside elderly volunteers. At the center of the room stood Claire. She wore a simple blue dress with rolled sleeves instead of royal silk, and her hair was loosely tied behind her shoulders. There was no crown,
No jewel cloak.
no royal attendants announcing her arrival. Yet every face in the room brightened the instant she smiled. She listened patiently as an elderly man explained repairs needed for a nearby bridge. She knelt beside a little girl struggling to read a sentence and celebrated every correctly spoken word as though it were the greatest achievement in the world. She laughed freely, and Ethan realized with quiet shock that he had never truly heard that sound before. Not because she had hidden it, but because he had never slowed down long enough to notice it. Claire looked healthier than he had ever seen her. The constant exhaustion had disappeared from her eyes, replaced by a calm confidence that needed nothing from anyone else to exist. She belonged here, not because people admired her title, but because they genuinely loved the person she was. Ethan remained outside for several minutes, unable to interrupt the life unfolding before him. Finally, Claire glanced toward the doorway and saw him standing there. Surprise crossed her face, but only for an instant. She excused herself gently from the conversation and walked outside into the warm afternoon sunlight. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. The breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers between them while distant laughter floated from the open windows behind Claire. Ethan noticed she no longer wore the wedding ring he had found on his desk. Claire noticed he had traveled without royal guards or ceremonial clothing. "You found me," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I almost did not." She smiled faintly. Sometimes people only find what they are truly looking for after they stop searching in the places they expected. Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time in many years. "I thought I understood what made a kingdom strong." Claire waited quietly. "I believed treaties protected people. Armies protected people. Laws protected people. He looked back at her with unmistakable honesty. I was wrong. You protected people in ways I never even saw. Claire's expression remained gentle, but there was no sadness left inside it. You saw what you believed mattered most. Ethan took one slow step closer before stopping again, careful not to cross a boundary he no longer had the right to assume still existed. Looking around the thriving village one more time, he understood something that humbled him more deeply than any defeat ever could. The woman standing before him had not needed a throne to become extraordinary. The throne had needed her all along. The afternoon sun drifted slowly across the valley as silence settled between them, but this time it was not the silence that had once built invisible walls inside Blackwood Citadel. It was the quiet space where truth finally had room to breathe. Ethan looked at Claire with a humility he had never known as king. For years he had believed leadership meant carrying every burden alone, solving every crisis before it reached his people, sacrificing every personal desire for the stability of the kingdom. Standing before Claire, he realized he had confused responsibility with isolation and duty with emotional distance. I came here to ask you to return, he admitted softly. But now I understand that asking you to walk back into the same life would only repeat my greatest mistake. Claire listened without interrupting. The warm breeze lifted a few loose strands of her hair, while children laughed somewhere beyond the nearby gardens. Ethan slowly removed the royal signet ring from his finger, the symbol every alpha king before him had worn, and held it quietly in his palm. For the first time since I inherited the throne, I left the kingdom because one person mattered more than the schedule waiting for me. Along the journey, I discovered that the kingdom I believed I had built was actually strengthened by your kindness, your patience, and your compassion. I never thanked you. I never truly saw you. And I cannot change that. Claire's eyes softened, not because the pain had disappeared, but because she could finally hear honesty instead of obligation. You are not the same man who watched me stand alone in that ballroom, she said gently. Ethan shook his head.
No.
Because that man believed love would always wait until he had time for it. Claire smiled sadly. Love waits for understanding, not forever. Ethan lowered his gaze before looking back at her once more. I do not deserve another chance simply because I regret losing you.
No, Claire answered calmly.
You do not. The words were neither cruel nor angry. They were simply true. Ethan accepted them with a slow nod. For the first time in his life, he did not search for an argument or a solution. Instead, he accepted the consequence of his own choices. After a long silence, Claire stepped toward him. I forgave you long before you arrived here. Ethan looked surprised. Then why did you leave? She smiled with quiet confidence. Because forgiveness does not always mean staying. Sometimes forgiveness means giving yourself permission to become the person you were always meant to be. Ethan looked around the thriving village once again. And you found that person? Claire nodded. I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me my life had value. The sun began to settle behind the mountains, covering the valley in golden light. Ethan carefully placed the royal signet ring back onto his finger, but somehow it no longer felt like a shield separating him from the world. It felt like a reminder of the king he still hoped to become. Then allow me to earn something I never earned before, he said quietly. Not your forgiveness. I already have that. Allow me to earn your trust. Claire studied him for several thoughtful moments before extending her hand, not as a queen greeting a king, not as a wife returning to her husband, but simply as one person offering another the opportunity to begin again. Ethan accepted her hand gently. There was no triumphant celebration, no grand declaration, and no promise that tomorrow would erase yesterday. There was only a shared understanding that real love could never be demanded by power, secured through politics, or preserved by duty alone. It had to be protected through countless ordinary choices made every single day. And as the evening sky filled with the first stars above the peaceful valley, the Alpha King finally understood that the strongest hearts are never the ones that rule others, but the ones humble enough to change before it is too late.